let me start while I wait for the two speakers for this morning to join us from another part of the accommodation that they're at the moment, and give you an update on what's been happening at the COP. As you recall, yesterday was Finance Day, but if I echo what's been happening in the midterm elections in the United States, it was less of a climate finance wave and more of a climate finance ripple. And what I mean by that is there were no major announcements. One suspects that's largely because behind closed doors, they're still waiting to see what does happen at the midterm elections, and we're all waiting for US President Biden to join us here at the COP in less than 24 hours, actually. And one expects that there will probably be some announcements following up from that. We did have a major announcement by the US climate change envoy, John Kerry, in relation to the establishment of a African carbon credit mechanism. But that, interestingly, has already been criticised by environmentalists and some project developers as not necessarily being terribly legit. And I will leave the punditry in relation to that will no doubt flow over the next few days in relation to its efficacy. But it's interesting to see that there have been attempts definitely to bring into the room the African nations into this dialogue at this COP, not just from a policy point of view, but if some of you have been catching up in what happened on Monday, for example, there was a major announcement about the establishment of a new African carbon market. So you have quite a lot of disparate activity that seems to be occurring at the moment here at this COP. And as one person observed in the breakfast briefing this morning, there's not an awful lot of big news that's yet happened. And I suspect that's largely because people were holding off for next week, which is when the ministers attend the COP. And there's going to be quite an influx of people into the Sharm El-Sheikh Conference Centre. Interestingly, we heard that the new numbers of attendees to the COP this year have now broken through the 52,000, which is extraordinary, just extraordinary. And as somebody was observing to me, it's weird because you don't sense that number of people at this particular COP. And I think it's because the venue is enormous. It is without doubt one of the biggest I have ever seen in the 18 COPs that I have ever been to. And so that kind of observation is, I think, an important one because it means there are more people, probably more new people, and more people being able to engage in a variety of different ways than we've ever seen before. I think the observation that's been made by me time and time again now is that the number of pavilions and the sheer size of the pavilions of countries at this COP is absolutely extraordinary. They are massive, and they have been hosting events, launches, cocktail parties in one case, quite substantial. Speaking of cocktail party, last night, the WBCSD held one following the launch of a very important report called the Business Climate Recovery Report. And I hopefully can bring it up on the screen for all of you to see because I have prepared something earlier in expectation of trying to find it. And now, of course, I can't. Nope, can't at the moment. So we'll come back to that in a minute. But it's a really important report, and I'm hoping that Dominic and Linden are coming anytime soon to give us their thoughts in relation to what the significance of that report is to business. But it, along with the other activities in the Business Hub, has probably been quite an interesting focal point for the COP so far. So the major business pavilions at this particular conference are almost lockstep or in jowl to something or other together at Area C, Pavilion C, Area C, where the pavilions of IETA, the International Chamber of Commerce, We've got the WBCSD and the Women Business Coalition, all very much close to one another, along with the Global Alliance on Building and Construction, which interestingly, and have been tracking our LinkedIn profile, we uploaded some important reports that have been released in the last 24 hours by the Global Alliance, talking to the issues of materiality and also finance in the building and construction sector. So take a look out for that. So it's an interesting, we're getting into, I think, a rhythm for this COP. It started a little hesitantly, particularly because we weren't sure if loss and damage was going to be on the agenda. It's now on the agenda. There's no sense coming through from our delegation, the Australian government delegation, or from all of the commentary that comes through, whether it's the Earth Negotiations Bulletin or even the Echo Voice, that there's necessarily a inability of the delegates to actually get on with the negotiations. So you're not hearing stories, as it's called, in the corridors of there being meetings that just can't be held, or won't be held, or people walk out, or there's got to be now a breakout for another meeting that has to happen at 3 o'clock in the morning because they didn't resolve the text that they were needing to resolve by that time. So welcome. And the first question I ask of everyone is, first COP, 10th COP, 20th COP? Dominic, is this your first?
Fortunately, it's not my first. My first was Copenhagen 2009.
Bad COP to go to.
Yeah, so that was fun. That was, I don't know how many were watching were there. That was in the, were you there, Andrew? It was in the, you remember, it was in the snow. No. The badges were all disorganized.
Yeah.
None of us could find anywhere of anything.
It was a small building.
Small building. And we had high hopes, which were dashed.
Yes.
Totally.
So that was my first COP.
and that's the COP that our then Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd,
That's right.
made that very famous statement that I won't repeat. Linden, number.
A number 4 or 5.
Okay.
But Copenhagen was my first.
Oh gosh.
So, but I was there wearing 2 hats. I was there as with ERM,
Yeah.
but I also took 30 young women from the World Association of Girl Guides and Girl Scouts. So I was in between putting my protester youth activist shirt on, and then I'd change into my business gear and walk into the business stuff, and then I'd walk back out, and the young people saying, "Why do you talk with business?" And and my memory of this, which is still on YouTube, is we did a flash mob in the middle of the whole kind of eating area one lunchtime, which is still on YouTube as a way of kind of in the days when flash mobs.
Well, that's a perfect segue for today because it's Science and Youth.
Yes, very right.
And
Nicely done.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well rehearsed, obviously.
Yeah, we planned this.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you raised that because, as somebody noted to me yesterday, it's the first time that youth have had a pavilion at the COP. Have both of you seen it?
Yeah, sorry.
It's extraordinary. And the other observation that was made by the same person was that a lot of leaders are going into it and actually sitting and listening. They're not telling, they're not talking. So kind of excitement in that respect, which then gets to the next segue. What are you hearing about the COP so far? So you, Dominic, you've been here what?
Since yesterday.
Yesterday.
Since I arrived in yesterday, and we're here for the week.
Yep.
And so hearing a couple of things, it's like anything, I think, people who, I mean, probably what some of you watching and listening might be kind of COP folks as well, but people who go to all of these things, they get so into all the details and they're saying, oh, we've got to kind of figure out this article or that thing. So there's one slice of all of the intricacies. More broadly, I'd say that people would say, yeah, what's the point of this COP? What's going on? Glasgow was a big one. What's happening here? I think that there's a super important things going on here, and this COP provides a milestone for it, which is not necessarily on the list of things to be negotiated. And that is lots of businesses, lots of financial institutions said they were going to do things, particularly last year at Glasgow. So, okay, here we are a year later. What have you done? Show us what you've done. Show us what progress you've made. Be accountable. And that accountability phrase is knocking around everywhere. Everywhere. Yeah. And that, I think, is the sort of almost the informal theme for the COP, accountability.
Yeah.
Okay, we trust you, but show us what you've done.
Yeah.
Don't greenwash us.
Yeah. What's that line about? Yes. Trust with evidence.
Trust with evidence.
Yes. What are you hearing? We'll come back to that point about accountability in a minute. What are you hearing?
I think on the back of the accountability is how hard this actually is.
Yes.
So
that's a really
we're
interesting
having
point.
lots of conversations. People said, well, we made the commitment.
Yeah.
And now we've realized this is really hard.
Yeah.
Really hard. And so lots of conversations about how are we going to get this done? And we can't get it done alone. And so I'm going to need to work with you and you and you. And let's get in a room and kind of say, this is where my challenge is, or you're in my supply chain, or we need to get to scale, or we need to go together to government and ask for things. So that how thing is absolutely coming through. And I think the other piece is opportunity. Yeah. So we had a great session the other day about offshore wind.
Right.
And,
yes.
and the opportunity for offshore wind to go to markets, anyone with a bit of coastline, really, can go there and get energy into some of these places that don't have access to energy. One part's decarbonising, the other part is access to energy for countries who don't have that. And people kind of going, okay, we need to get our heads together and figure out how we can deploy something like that.
Does that relate to that offshore wind alliance? That okay, that Denmark, I think,
part of that. So we're part of the Global Wind Energy Coalition Council, and that's part of trying to think.
When one says that.
But I mean, that's one of the things people going, okay, that's something that we can get after. And there's lots of other examples, but that's one. Yeah,
well, and I've noticed that on the pavilion, the number of bilaterals, roundtables between business and country, between business and business, needing to have breakout meeting because there's opportunity around X that needs to be done here. And that was the comment that was made in one of the sessions brokered by Peter Backer yesterday, where one of the business commentators, I think it was the lady from Barclays, said this was her first COP and she had no real expectation other than she knew that it was run by the United Nations. But when she got here, her impression was that it was a business event. And she said, it's a business event just done differently. I thought that was a really interesting observation, because picking up on that, yesterday, WBCSD launched a fairly important report around why it's kind of important to be part of this narrative, the climate recovery report.
Yes.
So give us a bit more insight into what that report's about.
Thank you, Andrew.
And I can't bring up the slide, I'm sorry.
No, that's quite all right. You'll find it on the website. So there we are.
I will send a link via chat later.
And it relates, Linden, to what you're saying is kind of how to get it done. So if you haven't, check out Catherine McKenna's report. She was the chair of a high-level expert group, which the Secretary General asked to look into what is it that we can say that when businesses or financial institutions, or what the UN calls non-state actors, are doing when they say they're going to have a net zero commitment, and what does good look like? And that dropped yesterday. And that's a big deal for like civil society or governments.
And spoiler alert, Catherine's going to do a pre-record next week for us.
Fantastic. Say hello to her when you do. So that was important from the governmental side. What the business for climate recovery, accelerating accountability, ambition, and action. That's the report. 3 A's. You see that thing, AAA rating. What that report does is sort of creates a how-to, if you like. So how do I go through my process of setting a net zero commitment? Of talking to the Science Based Targets Initiative or other kind of actors about what that should look like, of creating a transition plan which has the investment in it, the capex, the R&D, and which I can share with people. So it's not just within my company, so people can scrutinize it. It has capacity building of staff. It has all the things that you were talking about, Linden, that you do for the clients. When I've got that, then what do I do with it next? How do I do the accounting using the greenhouse gas protocol, scope 3 analysis, so I can really look at the metrics of the progress I'm making on it? And that is a whole world of engaging with carbon accounting. And if any of you know about the scope 3 stuff, and you'll know how tricky and difficult it is to get that methodology correct. And that's where this whole partnership on carbon transparency comes into play.
Being run by Anna
Stanley. And then lastly, disclosing it all. And disclosing it now increasingly against guidelines like the International Sustainability Standards Boards are creating. The point being is that we've always looked at these things individually. So there's a board for SBTI. There's people who are looking at roadmaps and transition plans. There are people who are looking at the greenhouse gas protocol, and there are people who are looking at disclosure. They don't really talk to each other, but actually we're in one system. It was one carbon accountability system.
Yeah.
And if you're a user from a company, you know how painful it is to go through all of those.
Yeah.
But if we can kind of change it and get that to be so user-friendly and smooth, we can industrialize literally the process, and that flywheel will spin, and we will kind of get this transition to work. That is what the report sets out. It's not, do we think it will happen? It's got to happen.
It's got to happen.
It's got to happen. And it's up to us as actors in that system to start joining these pieces and just making that a smooth thing. Then all of this action stuff finds a nice kind of place to go, because it's very clear that if you're making a global wind alliance and you are engaging in a target as a company as part of that wind alliance, and you are setting a transition plan, and you are putting your metrics in place for your carbon accounting, and you're disclosing, you're following all of those processes, and you're hitting exactly what Catherine McKenna is asking for in that report. So these pieces start to come together. So that's what the report says, and I think it's the first time that we've really placed all of these pieces of that journey into one kind of system. And our encouragement is to get people to actually start connecting together and figuring out how to have a harmony, if you like, across that system. So you almost have like one council, rather than 5 different boards.
Yeah. Well, what I like was what you said about it yesterday, which was it responds to the high-level expert group report, because it poses the question, well, what to do next? And the business recovery report kind of says, well, this is the way business can respond to it.
Exactly.
And I thought that was, and as I said in the session earlier today, it'd be quite nice if governments actually picked up on that kind of authenticity, credibility, transparency, and accountability as well.
Andrew, one important piece of that report is how that drops down to the national level.
Yeah, right.
Because I can't remember. I mean, tell us, the nationally determined contribution of Australia is it pretty good? Is it getting there? Is it on its way? Or?
We have
it's
one.
better than
We have one.
We have one.
Okay.
And there's a kind of
43% by 20.
So
okay, so
one of the few that actually went up in the last.
So that went up. Now, WRI, World Resources Institute, did a nice piece of it. You probably saw it, and they added up all the ones who went up.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's only a 7% overall global improvement.
So what did we get to? 2.4?
Yeah, we're on a 2.4.
Yeah, right.
So there's a ratchet.
I'm surprised it got to 7, but that's
on a good day with the wind behind, with the global wind energy alert,
Exactly.
it got to 7. But the point is lots more needs to be done at those national levels.
Totally.
So bring what we were just talking about all those companies who've got a footprint in or who are domestic, working through that kind of 4-stage process, link it, with that government dialogue, and find a way of illustrating how that contribution fits into the NDC. And then, because about 67% of most NDC emissions are coming from the business side of the economy anyway, then we're away. So a part of that report is setting out a piece of work where you can bring together the business community and the government to help the government raise its ambitions. What the high-level champions call as ambition loops, which is why it's a loop. And
that's the intention for next week when Minister Bowen turns up.
Right.
And Minister and Senator McAllister. So with any luck, we'll be having a little tete-a-tete.
Well, that would be cool. I mean, something, Andrew, we talked about in our council meeting in Tokyo.
We did.
Because the beauty of the global network of the World Business Council for Sustainable, like how you brilliantly lead the Australia activities, is
spoken for on behalf of.
We have the kind of ecosystems which are there in New Zealand, in Australia, in Brazil now under the new administration. Our colleague Marina is excited about.
She's very excited
about the possibilities.
Yes.
So it's kind of within our capability to do this,
to mobilise. And I was so heartened when you said that. So that's fantastic. ERM, why are you here? I know you're here for clients, but why?
Why? So we're here because we believe that everybody has to be part of this.
Yeah.
And we think we have a really important part to play because we work for the big companies of the world. we also have 7,500 super smart people who've been at this for 50 years and a big climate change team, right? So we are here listening, collaborating, you know, things like the breakfast we've just had, I guess Andrew told us around the natural climate solution. So this is about, we actually say we're going to make a commitment ourselves as our own company. We want to bring others along to this. We want to kind of get the message out there. So that's why we're here. We think we're part of an important, I guess, movement that needs to happen.
And you've been here for a while, and as you said earlier, the tone of the discussion has changed. I've noticed that quite dramatically. It's very much moved to implementation and that challenge of accountability. Do you think at this COP we are up to that task, or do you think, and this is the discussion we were having in Tokyo, that actually the next one will probably lend itself to higher ambition being the manifestation? So this one will be a good tidy up, let's get ready for what we're going to be doing next time, or do you actually think there's going to be building blocks? Because as I said before you turned up, climate finance was yesterday. Very few statements, in fact, almost none. And so the question is, so if this was badged as finance COP, it's not there yet. So that may change on Friday when Biden turns up, but you're not seeing a lot of big landmark announcements being made at this COP, but in which case it's a preparatory one for next one. Discuss.
I mean, I think it's back to that how question. I think people made those commitments and they're kind of almost nervous about putting any more big announcements out there until they can actually evidence the fact things are getting done. So they're kind of like, okay, we're getting down to business now, and we're just going to do, I don't know, next year, it has to be more ambitious. I mean, I don't know, you've probably got more insight.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, Linden. I think there's a phrase I've picked up, green hushing.
Green hushing.
Green hushing. So you got that one for free, green hushing. And it's exactly what you were just saying, Linden. It's a companies are doing more than you think, but they don't really want to talk about it because they want to make sure it's exactly right. And you know, having kind of the services of ERM or others that help them figure it out before they kind of go public.
Okay.
Because you know it's important to get it right and be accountable. But going too quick and too soon, some of those commitments that we saw, which were launched in Glasgow, quite quickly people realize, as you rightly said, well, it's quite hard to do. But I've now sort of said it publicly, so now there's an expectation from society about, well, how are you getting on? And the answer of, well, it's actually quite hard is not really the answer that most people want. So green hushing is a phrase to kind of put in the bank. It doesn't mean that nothing is going on. It means that I think quite appropriately people are trying to work out the details before they say, here's what we've got. So there's an element of that in the marketplace, I'd say, not just here in Sharm El-Sheikh. I think Sharm El-Sheikh is a very important COP because it's in North Africa. And just for that purpose alone. And we can see just by being here, it's a very different feel to Glasgow or other.
In lots of different ways.
In lots of different ways. So, and that's important because this flavour of another phrase that's knocking around, we're all hearing, is the just transition, making sure this is equitable and inclusive. And that's quite important, to say the least.
When you were saying green hushing, I think it's probably rainbow hushing I was almost going to go to, which is, you know, you're wearing your SDGP and I've got my SDGP. And
I've got SDG 9 today because I thought, you know.
Nice.
Because
does that mean you have like a badge for every?
I do.
You know.
Stop.
Do you want to pull the pearl because the other thing we're hearing is not just about carbon. It has to be about nature. And if we're not getting that, then you know,
exactly.
And that's a game changer at the COP to see that come into the narrative, but it also to be physically present as a pavilion.
To get a little bit geeky on that for a second, if we're allowed to. Okay, who can tell us to stop? But you're the man who's got all of the different badges for the SDG, so you're out geeking everyone. We had a very, very interesting natural climate solutions discussion just now, which you guys were both at, and thank you very much, Ian, for hosting it. But it came through loud and clear, I thought, in some of the discussions that there is a bit of a kind of muscle in the system of, it's carbon markets, you know, again. We can go back to do what we did before. All the things that we learned about carbon markets, number one, is that if we're going to have these investments into nature, into landscapes, they have to be more than literally a pure play carbon thing. You can't just find a piece of land, grow eucalyptus and quantify how much carbon you're taking. It does. People work on that land. People live on that land. People have a cultural linkage to that land. There's biodiversity and ecosystems. The flip side of that is exactly that win-win. Because those of you who follow these things, quite soon after Sharm El-Sheikh, there's Montreal, which is the CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity COP, and they'll come up with a framework, but they'll have no money for it. So the money's got to come from the the private side. So the build of this is super important. I think that is one of the areas which Egypt has got some teeth getting itself into on this one.
Right. Okay.
Next time round, this time next year, it will be in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. They're the presidency of COP28, and they have what they call a global stock take, right? Which is how are we doing after 5 years? And if we just look at those national plans as NDCs, I think the answer is going to be which is why, again, this dimension of the business side of it is going to be very important. So what's the business global stock take going to be? I think we mean business is going to try and put some numbers together for that. But it does mean that for the Dubai COP, it'll feel even more industrial. If you think about kind of the fossil economies, national companies, this sort of thing, I think it'll have that dimension. So for some, that is quite exciting because that's the transition that we need to make. For others, that will feel, hang on a minute, how did a climate change conference turn into national companies?
Tension/frisson around that particular
issue. But these are the realities that we've got to kind of wrestle with.
How else do we solve?
Right. So
last thoughts, Linden, what are you going to be watching over the next few days?
What am I going to be watching? I think for us, we'll be watching the how is actually the real grind about people getting together and figuring it out. And you just talked about hard to abate sectors. We've got our next couple of days around the hard to abate sectors.
Yeah, right. Okay.
We're not going to walk away. We've got to help the transition in the hard to abate sectors.
No. And Dominic?
Driving through that, this is how to carry on that phrase, is how to get that accountability stuff done. Sorry,
he's very emphatic.
So when I bang my you're banging my hand on the table because it will wobble. How to get the kind of accountability thing to actually work. Set the target, but that's not the end of it. Develop the transition plan, which has got the investment, it's got the capex, it's got the R&D. Make that clear. Figure out the accounting, scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3, and then disclose it. If you do all of those things, you're turning a kind of commitment into a kind of tangible action. Or if you're part of an industry initiative, you are taking the roadmap that's being developed and actually taking it into your enterprise, which I think, by the way, is a pretty good service offering.
Good idea.
And he's giving you that. And with that, we will say thank you very much to Dominic and to Linden for today. But for now, thank you so much. Andrew Petersen is my name. Goodbye and God bless. Bye.